This week we're talking about and reading about ethical leadership and servant leadership. And so I wanted to address this a little bit. While I find some of this literature to be compelling, I also find some of it to be a little bit soft and not necessarily fully addressing the challenges of being an ethical leader. I think that it's very interesting that the servant leadership perspective, and I like this idea that we should serve, because oftentimes I think we as leaders can become self-important. We have to be careful about that, because that can lead us down a path where we have ethical lapses. So keeping a perspective that we're serving others is very important. However, when I look at the writings on ethical leadership and servant leadership, to me it really doesn't address how challenging it can be to make decisions about what is the right thing to do and how do we approach ethical dilemmas. And usually when we're faced with an ethical dilemma, the emphasis is on the dilemma, that it's not clear about the best way to proceed, that we might be considering which is the lesser of two evils. And as a leader, sometimes we have to make that choice. So I'd like to talk about a method that I think is useful, and again, I think that in these circumstances it always serves us well to stop and examine the situation and analyze before we act. And that's why the method that I'm going to talk about uses an acronym called PREE, P-R-E-E. Okay? And what it's supposed to suggest is before you do anything, stop and think. Okay? And first letter in the acronym, P, is for principles. When you're facing an ethical dilemma, think about the principles that are most important to you. What are your values? And think about the values of the organization and the stakeholders of the organization. And you've got to look at all of those things, because those are the things that you need to represent well. You need to think about how those different principles and values relate to this specific situation, and whether perhaps some of those values may be in conflict with one another. There's many times two good things, let's say loyalty, it's good to be loyal, and integrity. Okay? But sometimes we can't be both at the same time. Okay? Maybe being loyal jeopardizes our integrity, and in order to fulfill integrity, we can't be loyal. And so we have to look and see whether those things are in conflict, and consider how should we prioritize those different values. And that may help us to decide how to act. Okay, so that's the P, principles. The next one, the R, is responsibilities. What are your responsibilities? If you're in a leadership role, you may have formal responsibilities that are defined by your position. And how do those specific responsibilities depend on the situation that you're facing? And so oftentimes you might want to look at, what is my formal responsibility? What are the policies of this organization? Sometimes you have an obligation to act, or an obligation to act in a certain way, in a certain time frame. Also, look at your professional standards. You may have professional standards that say, we as a group say this is the right thing to do. And so you should look and see, what are those standards that all of my colleagues have agreed upon is the proper conduct. And then think about, what are your responsibilities to the particular people involved in this ethical dilemma. Okay, so the second letter in our acronym, R, is for responsibilities. The next thing you have to consider are the end results, or the outcomes. But end results is E, so that goes with our PREE acronym. So how can you achieve the most favorable outcome for the most amount of people? Okay, that's the basic formula of utilitarianism. Okay, so that's not necessarily the correct way to respond in every circumstances, but in many circumstances, that's the best we can do, is look for the most favorable outcome for the most amount of people. We should also, in terms of end results, look at, are there ways that we can make corrections for or make amends for injustices? So if we can do something to correct a wrong, we should try and do that. We should also, in terms of our end results, ask ourselves, if our decision, if our actions were very public, how would we feel about that? How would you feel about it if your grandma or your mother or your spouse knew about your decision in the circumstances? Could you live with that? That's the type of thing you should think about in the end result. Now, PREE has one more E in it, P-R-E-E, and the last E in terms of facing ethical dilemmas is empathy. Okay, we should think about how we can address this situation with the greatest amount of consideration for all people involved. Okay, so everybody deserves a basic level of dignity and respect. Okay, and as a leader, we have to maintain that standard of keeping that level of dignity and respect. And so how can we respond in that situation to demonstrate respect, to maintain the dignity for everybody involved in that situation? And so oftentimes we have to make difficult decisions, but how we communicate those things, that can really be the difference between whether people think it is fair or unfair. I hope this is maybe a different perspective on ethical leadership for you. I look forward to talking with you all soon. Hope you're having a great week and a wonderful weekend. Bye.